I'm Stacy Taniguchi, and I'm a lifelong explorer and guide. I've led expeditions on 6 continents and summited every major mountain in North America. While I was living in Anchorage, Alaska, I served as a volunteer member of the Alaska Search and Rescue Organization, and my responsibility was to coordinate teams that managed search and rescue operations. One afternoon, I received a call about a possible rescue need at Turnagain Arm, just south of Anchorage, about 15 minutes from where I lived. Now, Turnagain Arm is a long, narrow extension of Cook Inlet, which is part of the Pacific Ocean. It sits in a valley bordered by sloping mountains on both sides. At 40 miles at its widest point, it stretches more than 40 miles long. At high tide, the moving water averages 40 feet deep. What it's really known for is the fact that it has the second largest tidal change in North America. There's an average 27-foot difference between water level between the high and the low tide. Now, to put that into perspective, that's about the height of a 2-story building. At low tide, Turnagain Arm has massive stretches of mud between the water inland and the ocean. As the high tide moves in very quickly, that muddy ground becomes the bottom of the body of water that gets buried in a fast-moving tide. It's really something incredible to see. But this is where the attraction and the danger come from. You can be standing on a field of mud, picking up shells and other sea debris at one moment, and then, if you're not paying attention, be engulfed under freezing North Pacific Sea water. Now, on this particular day, I received a 911 call that there was someone out in the mudflats at low tide, and they had become stuck in the mud. Now, mud can act like quicksand, where you can go from kind of stuck to up to your waist stuck very quickly. There was a lot of urgency and to respond to this situation. I jumped in my truck, drove the 15 minutes to the location, and I immediately saw what was happening. A woman was stuck about 80 yards off the shoreline, and by this point, she had sunk into the mud up to her knees. The best way to get her out without the rescuers getting themselves into the same predicament would be to use ladders and sheets of plywood or heavy plastic to spread both her weight and the weight of the rescuers across the surface of the mud. I made a call to the command center requesting some equipment, including the ladders and the plywood, and I also requested expert help from the paramedics at the fire department. Until help arrived, I spoke with the woman from the shore, yelling to her across the distance. I had learned from similar situations that if you don't get your feet free from the mud, there's little chance that you're going to get out at all. By this time, we were an hour past low tide and the clock was ticking. We didn't have much time before the board tide would fill the area with deep, freezing water from the ocean. I yelled to the woman to take off her boots and lay flat on the surface of the mud. Even though I repeated this instruction again and again, she refused. As the water began to get closer, the danger became twofold. We were still a few hours from high tide, which would bury her in the water and cause her to drown. But even before that point, any persistent contact with the incoming tide would be dangerous because of the bitter cold temperature of the water off the coast of Alaska. We only had minutes. Once the leading edge of the tide came in, hypothermia would set in and put her life at even greater risk. When trying to become unstuck, the worst thing you can do is panic and start moving violently to try to free yourself. The calmer you can be, the better off you'll be. I kept yelling to her to remove her boots, remain as calm as possible, but she began to panic, and she began sinking deeper and deeper into the mud. Soon after the rescue team started to arrive with equipment, as everything was put into place, we quickly realized we did not have enough material to reach her. The mud was so soft that without the plywood as a base, our ladders were sinking into the mud, making matters worse rather than better. We immediately called for more supplies, and while we were waiting, I looked out at the mouth of Turnagain Arm, probably 20 miles away. I can still see the board tide coming in. The board tide describes the place where the low tide going out hits the high tide coming in, and it creates this standing wave, a wall of water that will eventually collapse under the force of the incoming high tide. A board tide is a signal that literally the tide has turned. As the incident commander and I coordinated the effort from shore, it became apparent that we really couldn't wait for other supplies to arrive. We had to do something different, and we had to do it quickly. The woman was then waist deep in the mud. The rescuers would have to dig her out if they could even reach her, and that would take even more time. And time is what we did not have. The only solution left for us was to call the National Guard and have them send a helicopter and some PJs or parajumpers who are expert at water-based rescue. My hope was that they would be able to reach this woman in time and extract her before she was hit by the quickly advancing wave of cold water. Once the helicopter arrived, the plan was to lower a harness, a loop of heavy webbing attached by a cable to a winch on the chopper. The crew would instruct the woman how to situate her arms and head through the harness so it surrounded her torso. Then with the harness in place, they would gently lift her from the mud and out of the way of the onrushing tide. Luckily, the helicopter made it in on time and took its position above her and began to lower the harness. The wash or the wind coming off the rotating blades was loud and made it almost impossible for the woman to hear the instructions being shouted at her through the bullhorn. Imagine trying to put on a lightweight jacket outside in a windstorm. That's what it was like. Eventually, she was ready, but the tide was almost fully in. In that moment, as the helicopter gently began lifting this woman from the deep mud, her body went completely limp, and she slumped out of the harness. The rescue had failed. We had failed, a thought that still haunts me to this day. And she had failed to get unstuck. What could we have done better? How could we have responded faster, or even been more prepared? Sometimes there are forces that are completely out of our control, and we have to manage with what we have. It wouldn't be until later that I learned she had just bought a pair of brand new boots, and she wasn't willing to give them up until she was too stuck to change her mind. Think about that. A pair of boots. No doubt they were valuable, but like many things we probably value in our lives, do you think they were worth the price she paid for them? I really believe that we might have succeeded that day if she had been willing to leave her boots behind. It's something I have thought about often over the years. I share this story for a couple of reasons. One, that it serves as a caution. We need to be careful about what we are holding on to. Not everything is worth the price we pay. Another reason I share this story is a little more hopeful. It's easy to be overcome by the fact that the woman died that day, but it's important to remember that there are many people committed to helping. There are tools and time spent to do everything possible to free her from the muddy trap she found herself stuck in. I think there are more opportunities for us to succeed than we realize, and there are people and tools ready to help us when we get stuck, just as long as we are willing to let go, whatever it is that may be holding us down.